Great. Fabulous. We've got someone here from as far away as India, Hebron School in Uti, which is fabulous. In fact, we've got Barnabas as well, who's also from India. We've got 2 Indian colleagues here, or colleagues from India, which is fabulous. We've got people from Scotland here, fab, and Fakenham as well. Great. People are still just finding their way in, so I'll just give them another minute or 2. But yeah, if you're from anywhere more exotic or more exciting than India or Scotland, then do let us know. Derbyshire is also, you know, a beautiful place to be. I was just in Derbyshire this weekend, so. Coventry, yes. Deepest, darkest Coventry. Well, wherever you are from, it is lovely to see you, and you are most welcome. Most welcome as well if you are an ACT member, or if you're not yet a member. I hope that we can persuade you that being a member is well worth it, and is a good thing to consider. And Alistair, welcome from sunny Donny. I'm also in sunny Donny, although I wouldn't say it's particularly sunny at the moment. It's pretty dark actually when I look out the window, but absolutely sunny Donny. Well, it is great to have you here with us, and as I said, you are very welcome wherever you're from, wherever you're joining us from this evening. My name is Lizzie Harewood, and if you don't know me already, I work for the Association of Christian Teachers as executive officer. And we like to do sessions like this where we can kind of discuss and thrash out some of those big contemporary issues that are coming up in education, and think about them particularly from a Christian perspective. And of course, artificial intelligence is one of those things that we are all coming into contact with. I imagine that most of us use artificial intelligence to some extent most days, whether we realize it or not. I have to admit that I use AI sometimes, and I'm sure some of you do too. But for education, this has potential implications as well, that as Christians, we should be particularly aware of. And that is why we have this session tonight, thinking about a myriad of concerns and issues with a specialist in the field, and this is Jeremy Peckham. Now, Jeremy seems to have had an absolutely remarkable career in artificial intelligence, leading groundbreaking projects, founding artificial intelligence companies, launching it on the London Stock Exchange. But also, he's been really involved in church leadership and thinking about where faith, artificial intelligence intersect, particularly addressing some of those ethical issues. So I'm just going to introduce you. So Jeremy, if you're not already unmuted, if you can, fab. So Jeremy, just to quickly get to know you before we dive into the content, where are you joining us from this evening?
I'm in Worcestershire, just outside a little town on the River Severn called Bewdley. So very delightful part of the world, which I'm privileged to live in for the last 24 years, actually.
Fabulous, fab. And I think that you've had involvement in church leadership and being church elder for many years, and you've had the opportunity to kind of think about this kind of thing in some detail over the past few years. Yeah. I believe that you've actually just written a book on artificial intelligence. Tell us just a little.
2021, that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that you've been helping out lots of Christians in different realms think through these issues in various symposiums and webinars and seminars. And we're really delighted you're going to be here speaking with us. Now, I find it quite funny. We all had a few problems. Well, I say all. Jeremy, myself, and Joe, our admin and development officer, had a few issues getting into Zoom this evening. And we just thought how funny it was that technology seemed to be a bit of a stumbling block for all of us. and yet it can be so useful in our lives, and we can obviously give thanks for this. But Jeremy, just before you kind of go into the content of your webinar, can you tell us just a little about some of the other work you've been doing with other organizations, helping them to think about artificial intelligence in different realms?
Sure. Basically, my involvement of the last year or two has been a mix of working with Christian organizations. For example, just a week or two back, 2 weeks back, I think we did, I organized a symposium under the umbrella of Affinity for churches and Christian organizations around the UK. And that was specifically looking at AI in Christian ministry. So preaching, pastoral work, and leaders of NGOs thinking about whether to use ChatGPT for evangelism, for example. Then I'm also quite heavily involved in what one might call the sort of secular sphere. I've recently become a commissioner for the AI, Faith and Civil Society Commission that involves a number of people of different faiths and no faith, and indeed humanists as well. So that's been a very, very interesting opportunity to really come at it from the Christian perspective that you'll hear tonight that I have on how we should think about what we are as humans. So that's been interesting. And then as a fellow of the RSA, I'm just actually the end of this month going to be on a panel looking at might AI be as intelligent as humans? And that's a series of topics which I've been organizing at the RSA to try and educate both fellows and the wider public on some of the issues surrounding AI. So that's a very brief thumbnail sketch of some of the things.
Wow. Well, we're honoured to have you here, and we're very thankful for you. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to your presentation. I'll just briefly pray. Now, I was going to ask our chair to pray, but he's got his newborn baby on his lap, and I think the baby might be trying to sleep. So I'm going to let David have a bit of reprieve from his duty, and I'll pray for you just before we start.
Yeah.
Father God, we are thankful that technology can enable us to be here together this evening. We thank you so much for Jeremy, for his expertise, for his experience in this field. And we pray now that as he speaks to us, that as he shares his knowledge and understanding with us, that you would also just inspire him to shed light on these deep philosophical and ethical issues, Lord, that biblical wisdom would be underpinning this, and that we would be those that would benefit not only through understanding things better, but also able to take this into our classrooms, our schools, and to encourage and challenge those in our church community as well, Lord. So please give us great focus now as we listen to this fascinating topic. We pray this for your glory and your glory alone. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Lizzie. Welcome to you all. I can see some of you. So this is a huge topic, artificial intelligence, and tonight, really, all I'm going to be able to do is to introduce you to the issues that you might be facing in education. What I want to do is to basically address three topics this evening. What is artificial intelligence? Then to have a look at some biblical principles for thinking about how we engage with artificial intelligence. And then finally, and importantly for all of you, to think about the implications for education. Now, I'm hoping that we might have some good time for discussion at the end of the session. So I will try to be as brief as possible so that there's time for your questions and opening it up for discussion. I can see on my presentation, I've got some annotations, some red marking, which shouldn't be there. Is that coming up for everybody? I don't know.
Yeah, don't worry, don't worry.
Okay, I should try and get rid of that maybe if I. So there's probably a way of just doing a delete, isn't there? So somebody knows how to do it. Just Lizzie, you interrupt and tell me how to do it. So what is artificial intelligence? Interestingly, there's a quote from a get-together and a paper that was written in 1996, which basically says when 24 prominent theorists who ought to know how to think about artificial intelligence were recently asked to define, that's in 1996, intelligence. They gave 24 somewhat different definitions. So I think one of the things that we all know is that there is really no standard definition of artificial intelligence. Wikipedia has quite intelligence, not artificial intelligence, and that is it's the capacity for abstraction, for logic, understanding, self-awareness, learning, emotional knowledge, even reasoning, planning, creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. So there's a lot in there. The well, sorry, I'll get used to this in a minute. The Cambridge Dictionary has a much shorter definition of intelligence, very sort of brief and quite narrow, I think. The ability to learn, understand, and make judgments or have opinions that are based on reason. And I think that's quite a narrow definition when you think philosophically about what is it? What is it that the mind does? What is it that we do? So what is artificial intelligence? Well, my definition is very, very simply the attempt to mimic human behavior with computer programs, computer software. And of course, that can appear in robotic form as well. Now, this is a very quick overview of the whole domain of artificial intelligence, which is really a part of computer science, computer engineering, I guess, which is a discipline that tries to look at how we can mimic or replicate aspects of human behavior, whether that's intelligence as we've defined earlier, or however you want to define that. And traditionally, artificial intelligence started off with mostly a symbolic approach to defining knowledge and doing reasoning, trying to encapsulate, if you like, what we think is going on up there. That didn't get very far. And when I first started out, we were in what was called the AI winter. That is that funding dried up for artificial intelligence research because it wasn't going anywhere. And that's because most of it was based on symbolic processing. When I started out, we got into the very early stages of what are called neural networks. You've no doubt heard the term bandied about. Essentially, a statistical pattern matching approach to doing artificial intelligence. And from that, there's a whole subsection of artificial intelligence, which we call machine learning. And that is basically the idea that you take a whole bunch of data, you process that with some algorithms that will then be able to either predict or to classify some new example of what it is that you've trained it on, like faces of cats or dogs, and so on. Deep learning is a further specialization of the machine learning domain, which is again based on neural networks, but the whole idea that you now have multiple layers. So the whole idea is that this is able to encapsulate more information. One of the things that you'll notice about artificial intelligence is the frequent use of anthropomorphisms. And I think that's very, very unfortunate. Part of the problem that we have with this whole domain is the word intelligence. And people are using words that really ascribe to humanity, like thinking and reasoning and learning, to computers. And it's perhaps in some senses debatable as to whether our computer programs really are doing the same thing as what we are doing as humans. Then two areas of application, if you like, of artificial intelligence. The one that we're going to talk most about tonight, which has been in the news since 2022, is generative AI, which essentially is predicting on the basis of something that you type in what the most likely output should be. We'll go into that just a little bit more. You may have heard the term large language models. These are essentially models trained on trillions of tokens scraped from the internet, some of it arguably illegally. And so there are a number of copyright infringement actions in the US at the moment about that. But it's important to get into our minds that what this generative AI is trained on would take us about 5,000 years to read. So it's giving you some idea of the vast quantity of information that these models are trained on that you or I would never have any possibility of learning. Discriminative AI came before generative AI, and that is about essentially classifying things that you present to it, that it's been trained on, whether it's images of people or cats or proteins, whatever that might be. Here's an example of discriminative AI that you may have come across. The Met Police use this for live surveillance. Several other police forces do as well. You have a database of faces, and the essential job there is to predict the likelihood that somebody who's imaged in the camera walking along is a person of interest that's contained in your database. And you can see in the little red area there that this is coming up with a match of 67.2%. There's no certainty. It's always only a probability that that image over on the left in your database matches the person that you're actually imaging with your surveillance camera at the time. That's discriminative AI. It's used for all sorts of things. And generative AI, which is the area that is most impacting all walks of life, and certainly education, as we'll see it in a moment. Generative AI essentially predicts the most likely output from a prompt. One way of thinking about it is, I'm sure you've all used on your computer or your smartphone, your messaging, and you can see it's trying to predict what the rest of the word is that you're trying to type. Generative AI just takes that a whole lot further. So if you ask it to write a 1,000-word essay on some character from a Shakespeare play, then it will generate 1,000 words along the request that you have typed in. So on the screen here, you can see a prompt. How much text have you been trained on? This is an actual query that I put into ChatGPT a couple of years back. And it outputs, notice it says, I have been trained, personification again of this artifact. I have been trained on a massive amount of data, and so on. So the outputs from generative AI can be anything from text to still or moving images, protein structure prediction, and indeed computer code, an area where the technology is quite heavily used at the moment. And the input prompt is usually a text prompt. Now, this technology does have severe limitations. There's no thinking or reasoning going on, despite Nobel Prize winner of physics recently, Geoffrey Hinton, saying it is thinking and reasoning. I think he's wrong. Lots of other people think he's wrong. Not just Christians, but people who are working in the field that I worked in, which was natural language processing and understanding. It is simply statistical prediction based on the data that it's been trained on. And when we see the the errors, the problems, the limitations of the technology in action, you begin to see that it has no clue what it is doing. It is just simply doing a statistical prediction. Now, that's not to say it's not incredibly impressive in terms of the natural language output that it produces, but it's producing it simply as a synthesis of the data that it has been trained on that best matches what you have requested. And of course, this is done also through a final, what is called a supervised learning process, where essentially humans are inputting questions and it outputs an answer, and you feed back and forth until it produces answers that are what you would like it to do. You're probably very well aware that one of the problems with this technology is it can produce misinformation. Doesn't surprise me in the slightest, because it is simply statistical prediction. There's no certainty in terms of what it is outputting. What are the application areas for generative AI and even discriminative AI? Well, it's everywhere, as you're probably very well aware now, and I just listed some of the areas that this technology is being used in. I don't have time to sort of drill down into any of these in detail, because I want to focus on specific applications in education this evening. Now, one of the questions that is often put to me, or indeed statements, but AI is just a tool, isn't it? And I think it isn't. There's a lot of talk, as you well know better than I, in schools now about smartphones and whether they should be banned or not in school. Here's a quote from Sherry Turkle and her book, Reclaiming Conversation. "So it's not surprising today," she says, "that young people become anxious if they are alone without a device. They are likely to say they are bored. From the youngest ages, they have been diverted by structured play and the shiny objects of digital culture." So she's making a point there that the technology of just the smartphone has shaped a whole generation that have grown up not knowing anything else, and particularly if they have had it placed in their hands at quite a young age. Technology definitely impacts, thinking particularly about the education area. Here's a quote from Patricia Greenfield from quite an old article, 2009, about technology rather than AI, but it, I think, still applies. Mindful knowledge acquisition, inductive analysis, critical thinking, imagination, and reflection. Hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit more about this and your views on this topic. So technology does shape society, has an impact. First off, people who design and develop and then sell technology shape what they produce. They have their own values, their biases, and their incentives. Why does social media why is it so toxic? Well, because the algorithms that are designed to keep people on the platform have been designed along psychological principles from a Christian worldview, I would say, to appeal to our vices. It's a well-known fact that fake news, misinformation, travel 6 times faster across the internet than people shaped and developed that technology intentionally to get people addicted to social media. And what happens when technology presents itself, philosophers call it affordances. Technology has affordances, that it opens up possibilities. Now, they can be possibilities for human flourishing, but they can also be possibilities for human harms, as we've seen in the whole issue of social media. But what happens is that as technology shapes society, all of us become shaped by that technology and the way it's used, so it becomes established as a norm. So social media, X, it is kind of a norm amongst most of the population, and becomes a shared value in terms of how perhaps we even communicate with each other. And those who are promoting it create power structures. It's interesting to note that this technology of artificial intelligence is controlled by a relatively small number of big players who have enormous funding and amounts of money, and of course enormous influence in governments. So it's circular, the whole thing feeds back, and people reinvent new things on the basis of how society has been shaped to desire or to want particular outcomes. Okay, so that's a very brief look at what is artificial intelligence. I want to move on now to think about how might we think about our engagement with this technology from a Christian worldview. What are the biblical principles that we can deploy to think about how, in a school context, in a home context, any other context, we might engage with it? The biblical principles really are about developing a Christian anthropology, that is a uniquely Christian view of what does it mean, excuse me, to be human. And the best place for us to start is the book of Genesis. Then God, and let them, man and woman, have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So a biblical view of humanity, starting with the Genesis account and going on into further chapters, enables us to develop three essential pillars of what I believe it means to be a human being. The first is what we are made like. God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And what does that likeness mean? Well, theologians have debated this for centuries, and no doubt they still will continue to debate that. But I think what is fairly uncontrovertible is that we can see that what God is like, the essence of God, has to do with God being reasoning, rational, creative, a moral person. He is loving, he is just, he is righteous. And in some measure, humanity was, of course, created, Adam and Eve were created perfect, but then they sinned through the fall. They sought to, in a way, sort of have their own moral autonomy and be independent of God, if you like. And we know the consequences of that, of course. So that's what we are made like, with the attributes, many of which are found and still mirrored in humanity today, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. And that's actually quite helpful for us to remember, particularly you as educators, when you're sitting in front of a class of unruly children, maybe, that they are still made in God's image. The functional view asks the question, what are we made for? And in Genesis there, we can see that God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the birds of all of these, the fish of the sea, sorry, and over the birds and the heavens and so on. And so that really is God giving us stewardship, I think, is a better word. Dominion has this sort of idea of dominating and exploiting, whereas actually we are vicegerents. That word is a Latin word which means vice, in place of, and gerere, to carry on. So we are carrying on in place of God. The stewarding, the looking after the creation, which, as we know from the Garden of Eden, involves working. We'll see in a moment that these are quite important concepts for us when we think about what does it mean to be a human being. Then finally, there's the relational view, what we are made to be. God said it is not good for man to be alone, and we know that he created Eve to be a companion with Adam. And so the two things there, one is that God created us for that vertical relationship with himself, and the horizontal relationship, most intimate with a woman and a man in a marriage covenant, and of course our neighbors. We are to love our neighbors as ourselves. So he's created us for relationship. So if we take a holistic view of Christian anthropology, what does it mean? I've defined, you can read more about these in my book, 6 key areas that are useful to think about also in terms of technology, and particularly artificial intelligence. That is bringing together what it is to be made like after God's attributes, what we're made for as vice-gerents, and also to be in what I call authentic relationships. So those 6 areas: moral agency, truth and reality, cognition and creativity, authentic relationships, the dignity of work, and freedom and privacy, are things that come out of our understanding of what it means to be a human being from a Christian worldview perspective. Now, that's all very interesting, but it isn't just a piece of academic theology. There's a call to action that we read in the New Testament, and that is that we are to be imitators of God. As Christians, we are called to be imitators of God. And of course, the Apostle Paul tells us that we are to be imitators of him, even as he is of Christ. And we read in Hebrews that Christ is the exact imprint of God's nature. And we also read in Romans that we are predestined to be conformed to the image of Christ. So we have a very, very rich understanding there of how God the Father and God the Son, together with God the Holy Spirit, are one, requiring us and enabling us, in fact, to be imitators of God, to reflect that essence of God, which is what it means to be human. Now, it's important for us, I think, as we think about engaging with AI, to realize that there's a clash of worldviews here in terms of what it means to be a human being. And it's essentially a naturalistic versus a Christian worldview. Many of those who are leaders in the AI world are what are called long-termists. That is, that they have the view that AI could overtake man in evolution, and so we could either be replaced and displaced by AI, or we could become synergistic. We could become part of AI. So it's important to understand that actually some of these big players, that's how they think. And of course, their choice is that they would rather that we uploaded our brains into AI and that we became in some way synergistic with this technology. That is a very clear clash of worldviews, in my opinion. And I think that what we see reflected so often in our society is an outworking of that, where on the one hand, people tend to think about our identity being based on what we do. So we are what we are by what we do. That is the functional definition, if you like, of the human brain, the human mind. And when you have that worldview, it's not unreasonable to understand why people think that the analogies are made with a computer and how a computer works in terms of the algorithms used for AI, kind of imposed on how maybe the brain works. On the other hand, the Christian worldview that we've just outlined basically would say we do what we do because of what we are. And from a Christian perspective, people made in the image of God, in the likeness of God, with a responsibility to be vicegerents and to have authentic relationships. So I think, I hope you'll find that useful in processing that, thinking it through later, perhaps, as you reflect on this talk, because it helps to explain why there is such a clash of views about artificial intelligence and how we should or shouldn't use it. So in summary then, as we think about a biblical worldview of what it means to be human and what that means for us and our engagement with AI, a key thing that we need to think about is AI a help or a hindrance as far as what it means to be a human being? Now, many AI applications are more about replacing human functions. And that's this argument that we are just functional beings, our brains just do this and do that. We write something and it produces an output. So it's more about that rather than valuing our status, that is, people made in God's image with the essence of God's character and nature that we are to reflect, however badly or poorly, nonetheless to reflect it, knowing that as Christians we are being transformed into his likeness. So essentially, that is what we are called to do, to reflect God's essence, which is what it means to be human. Okay, so we looked at what is artificial intelligence. We've thought about some biblical principles that we can use to think about how we engage with AI. Let's now come on and look at what the implications are for education. How do these AI tools impact teachers and students? Do they enhance or diminish what it means to image God? And I think it's helpful not only to think of ourselves in terms of how does this help us to be good imagers of God, imitators of God, but because all of your children, the young adults that you are educating, are also made in God's image, I think it's not an unreasonable question to ask, in what way are the tools that you are engaging with or being asked to engage with and use helping your children, your students, to better reflect what it means to be a human being? Interestingly, the Beijing Consensus that many of you may know about, that was written up in 2019, says this: the use of AI technologies in education should enhance human capabilities for sustainable development and effective human-machine collaboration in life, learning, and work. So there's kind of a nod there somehow that the use of AI in education should enhance human capacities. I don't like the use of the word collaboration. I don't have time to go into this today, but philosophers do write about this. And in fact, I would go so far as to state that an artifact has no moral agency. It cannot have any moral agency. Only humans can have moral agency. So collaboration is really about what happens when humans work together. And this idea of using anthropogenic terminology, I think, again, is misleading. We don't collaborate with an artifact. You don't collaborate with the spanner when you're tightening up a nut, for example. But it's interesting that there is that reflection that it should be to enhance human capacities. However, on the other hand, the drive for artificial intelligence in education, this is a statement put out by the Department of Education in October 2023, is to reduce the workload across the educational sector and free up teachers' time, allowing them to focus on delivering excellent teaching. Now, that's something that we might debate. How do you deliver excellent teaching? But clearly, the impetus here is you are all highly pressured. You never seem to have enough time to do all of the marking that needs to be done and the preparing of lessons and so on. And that it's well acknowledged that this is a problem, this is a pressure in the teaching sector. So Department of Education there is wanting this technology to somehow improve your productivity and to make your life easier. The question is, will it and should we be using it? Where is AI currently being used in education? These are just some of the apps and tools that have been developed recently, specifically for the education sector. There's a whole bunch of tools for planning, lesson planning. There's tools for grading, tools for student feedback, and then, of course, general purpose tools that many of you may have already played with and experimented with, whether it's for generating text, writing an essay, summarizing a document, or indeed for generating new images, as Midjourney would do for you. So those are some of the specific applications that are available currently in education. And I know that I've talked to a group of teachers, from lecturers down to primary school teachers in our church. Really useful time of interacting with them, and some of them have available TeachMate, for example, in a primary school context. So when we're thinking about those applications, and they may seem very seductive and something that we think, wow, this could really make my lesson planning so much easier, and I wouldn't have to spend so much time on doing it. The questions that I think we need to ask are these, and by the way, these apply to our engagement with any technology. From a Christian perspective, we need to ask, what does it do for us? What does this technology do for us? And the flip side, what does it do to us? It might not do anything, but does it do something to us? And also we need to ask, what is gained by the use of this technology? And on the flip side, what might be lost in using this technology? Now, on the positive side, as I've said, in education and of course throughout business, the incentive is productivity. What does it do for us? Well, this will just enable us to be much faster, much smarter, save us time. And Tony Blair believes that this is the thing that will revolutionize the economy. Very much trying to persuade Keir Starmer that this is what he should be on board with, because it's going to revolutionize the UK economy. And that's a mantra we hear throughout the global north or the Western world. When we think about those questions, what does it do for us? What is gained, but what is lost? I think we need to think of that as Christians in the context of what it means to be a human being. So if we think of those 6 aspects of being human, the fact that we have moral agency, we are those who should be speaking truth, that should have a firm sense of reality. We have been placed in relationship with God to live in a physical, real world, not a virtual world. We have been created with freedom, and the Old Testament speaks a lot of privacy and not moving boundaries. It's very clear from the creation mandate that we have a responsibility to work, and that there is dignity in work. What we're made to be is to have loving, authentic relationships with other human beings. We've been created in the likeness of God, with cognitive faculties, ability to reason, to think, to do logic, to do abstraction, and of course to be highly creative. So the questions we need to ask: in what ways might AI tools replace some of those 6 key aspects of our humanity? Where we can use them, where we can gain, in my view, is where they amplify or augment rather than replace and de-skill. So thinking about the particularly again educational sector, what are the things that might be lost? Well, what does this technology do to us? In some areas, it sidelines human creativity. So when we get Midjourney to produce a graphic for us or a picture in the style of Picasso, just with a few text inputs, we are sidelining our own human creativity. What might be lost through the ongoing engagement of both students and teachers with this technology? Well, there are questions about loss of pastoral input, that is, authentic relationships that we're designed for. What about problem solving? What about the skills that you develop and hone and learn through lesson planning and creative thinking about new ways to engage with students? Do we lose the concept of embodied learning, which I think is a key part of what it means to be human? Do we lose that when we push students in front of a screen and tell them to get on with their own lesson that will be wonderfully tuned and modified for their own particular learning requirements? So those are some of the key questions I think that we need to ask. I came across some interesting research that was done by St Mary's University in Twickenham. They interviewed several schools at secondary and primary level, and there was a mix of responses from people saying that it's going to make life much easier in the future, but the recognition that it might empower students to beat the system, which will mean that education has to make a fundamental change. But this person believes that it really empowers the students and gives them agency that they've not had before. Well, I think that might be questionable. Others are a little bit less enthusiastic. Here's a comment that suggests that you need to experiment as a teacher and see what works with a class. One size doesn't fit all. So the comment is that embrace the technology, embrace AI, move with the times, but don't forget the human touch. The key, this person says, secondary teacher, is to get to know the children in your room. AI can't do that. Of course, it can't. Another quote: sometimes the organic planning process means you come up with new and innovative teaching ideas, but with AI, you wouldn't go through this process. And so you would potentially miss out in terms of what you might end up with through automated lesson planning. It's interesting that earlier this year, not long after that statement about AI being something that should improve the teacher's lot by reducing the time that they spend, I've seen claims about 10 hours a week saved by the use of these AI tools. But as a result of a consultation, there's a lot of feedback from stakeholders, that would be various people. And here's the statement: stakeholders have raised concerns that an over-reliance on AI tools could lead to the erosion of teaching, writing, and reasoning skills, and may fundamentally change the educational experience offered to young people. For example, some educators have noted that overuse of generative AI could negatively affect the development of some teaching skills. Further, AI tutors may lack the pastoral care which can be offered to learners by human teachers. So we've looked at what is AI. We've thought about the implications for education, and I'd like really now to give us an opportunity to have a discussion. Really, over to you to ask me questions, to make comments. And I hope we can have I don't know, how much time have we got now? Perhaps 25 minutes or so, Lizzie, where we could hopefully have a real back and to see what you think, and ask me whatever you like. But apologies, it's a very, very brief overview. It's a very big topic. But hopefully that will get us started.
Thank you, Jeremy. I mean, goodness me, it's obvious that your kind of knowledge and expertise in this area is pretty outstanding. And yeah, you've raised some really important ethical, moral issues, and most importantly, I think, what it means to be human and made in the image of God. And I would love to kind of open up the floor. People might want a bit of time just to think about any questions they have. I do have a couple up my sleeve that I was kind of thinking about as you were talking. But yeah, if you would like to ask a question, you could either raise your hand or you could type it into the chat. That's absolutely fine. You can do it either way. But maybe, oh, excellent, there's already one. Found that challenging students who are suspected of generating essays completed using AI when they know I'm a Christian to be a very difficult area. Now, yes, I imagine that many teachers, particularly if you're teaching at secondary level, further education or higher education, would be used to getting essays, assignments that have been completed using potentially partially or wholly artificial intelligence. I'm just wondering, out of people here, would many people say that they use artificial intelligence in their work in schools, if they are indeed employed in schools or work or volunteer in schools? Maybe just type in, or chat GPT. Yeah. Sparks. So there's going to be a lot of programs here that I am not really aware of. Sparks. Would someone mind explaining what Sparks is? Because that's one that I've actually not come across.
I can say a little bit if you want.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so we've just literally introduced it in my school, so we haven't done a lot of it. But we're using it for maths. I think there is a science and a reading version. But it basically tailors tasks to the students. You set them off on a certain level, and then it sort of gets to know what they're good at and what they're not good at, and then it sets them homework based on what they need to practice. So yeah, that's sort of basic.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and that's actually something as a parent, I kind of recognize that format. I know with my children's, with their spellings, they have a particular program whereby they tailor the spellings when they do practice. They kind of get to know which spellings, which types of spellings my children might struggle with. Although, to be honest, we often just do the old-fashioned way of paper and pen anyway. Interesting. So people have said things like Canva, Copilot, Lexia. Now, I find it really interesting because when I think of Canva, I don't necessarily think, well, that's artificial intelligence, but I suppose that is artificial intelligence, especially when you're using some of the functions whereby you can create images, or you just type in the kind of style, or they come up with suggestions. I suppose all of that is potentially artificial intelligence. In fact, Joe and I were creating an image the other day for the journal, for the ACT journal, and we noticed that the image, if you look very closely, one of the boys on the cover had a finger growing out of his shoulder. Now, thankfully, we didn't use that image. And I think we actually reverted back to finding an actual human that was trying to kind of exemplify the story that we were telling. But yeah, absolutely. So questions then. Let's see. Okay, so David's got a question. David is the chair of the ACT board. I read an article recently that highlighted the electricity demand of AI. That's interesting. So Jeremy, have you got any comments on this conflict between the increasing use of AI, environmental impact?
It's a huge impact, and it's much discussed amongst the sort of tech community and others that are informed about it. You can tell how much money is going to this when you realize that companies like Google and Microsoft are now investing in nuclear technology. Because the thought is that the data centers that are involved in actually processing when you're using ChatGPT or these other tools or a Copilot consume huge amounts of not only electricity but water as well, because they need water for cooling. So it is a huge concern, and that's not to say anything about the minerals and the mining consequences of producing all of the silicon chips that are needed. I think it's Meta who's invested $1 billion just in advanced graphics cards from NVIDIA to build the bigger and bigger and bigger parallel processing engine. I think a lot of people are not really aware of the environmental consequences of this, and yeah, people will try and make the algorithms more efficient, and I'm sure people, there's so much money invested in it that they'll come up with solutions and greenwash the technology, if you like, by saying, oh, well, we're using renewable energy and so on. But there is a big environmental cost, and yet people are just so hooked now on this technology. And it's beginning to become normalized. And I think we're not asking enough of the fundamental questions about where is this taking us, and especially in education, how is it sidelining the creative, the cognitive process, the need for human pastoral care and knowing your children. We had a really interesting discussion with teachers in our church just and comments that I was getting were along those lines, that you need to get to know your children, and when you know your children, your students, you know what their needs are, you can plan accordingly, and you can deal with them as humans, as individuals, rather than sticking them in front of a computer, or yourself sitting in front of a computer and saying, here's a personalized lesson plan. So I think there are key issues like that. I know it's tough in teaching. I don't teach myself except when I'm doing this sort of thing. I do put a huge amount of preparation in, but I know that there's a lot of stress and pressure. I asked one of our teachers who works in a private secondary school. There's a whole mix from state schools, primary, secondary, university, and she said that they're not using AI at all, and they have no intention of. And I asked her about what she felt the pressures were, because she's very, very stretched, very, very committed to what she does. And she says, well, I think the pressure comes because we just want to do a good job. And I thought, to my mind, that said it all, really, that if you want to do a good job, it is difficult. Many professions are challenging and difficult when you really want to do a good job and give your all to children and students. So
there are so many dimensions. There are so many dimensions, and it's really interesting that David's brought up the question about the environmental impact, because that's something that I really hadn't considered whatsoever. But obviously the human impact, well, I know obviously the two are related, and then thinking about the human sort of the ability of AI to mimic human mannerisms, etc. Charmian's got a very good question. What do you think is the reason for the very common use of anthropomorphic words and phrases in relation to AI, and how can we better effectively emphasize the difference between AI and humans in the way we talk about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that really, really frustrates me, to be honest. I think it is because the people who are generally using the anthropomorphisms have a functional view of what the human mind is. And if you have a technocentric approach to thinking about the human brain, you will tend to sort of really start to describe what's going on up here in computer terms. And when you develop something like neural networks, which are modeled very, very crudely on the neurons in the brain, they're nothing near as sophisticated, as we don't really completely understand how it works up here. But because people are saying, oh, well, this is modeled on neural networks, just like the brain is, and we're using similar concepts, you develop something like ChatGPT and people say, wow, you know, this is the human brain. Not yet quite as good, but we've only got to do a few more iterations or a few more years, and we'll have something that is even a super human computer, if you like. So what happens is that you then, if you produce an output when you ask ChatGPT something, and it produces a very convincing output, people start to say, well, oh, it's thinking and it's reasoning because it's produced this new output, and I only asked it a question or asked it to write something. So I think that's one of the reasons that we do use a lot of anthropomorphisms, because we're thinking of the brain as just a functional entity rather than no, we're humans. We think, we are creative. What is this computer doing? And I'd much rather call it advanced data processing. But of course, that's not a sexy term, and no one would get funding that they desire if they, oh, we want 5 billion for advanced data processing. Oh, really? I don't think venture capitalists would be that interested. But when you can promise replacing humans with a computer that will, advance general artificial intelligence is about trying to replicate everything that a person can do, with their brain. I don't think we'll ever get there personally, but that's a very seductive end game for people who want to make lots of money, because why would you want to replace humans? Well, because you can make lots of money by doing so.
Goodness me.
I think one of the things, I'd be interested to know what you guys think, really. I've been thinking for a while that one of the tasks that we need to do is to educate children and students a lot better about what AI really is, and how we should think of it, and in contrast that with what we think a human being is. And what I found really interesting is working with different faith groups and even humanists is that there's a general resonance with the terminology that I often use. Well, the 6 points actually are now part of the framework we're using in the AI Faith and Civil Society Commission. So I don't set it out explicitly as a Christian worldview. People know I'm a Christian. But I do think there's a way perhaps of reaching children and students to help them think through, what does it really mean to be a human? As Christians, we know, we've got that insight, and help them to think about what actually are these computers and these algorithms, and help them to realize that they're just processing vast quantities of information. And I'd be surprised if they didn't pass the bar exam. If wouldn't you pass the bar exam if you could have studied all of the books that are relevant and stored them up there and just recalled them in a fraction of a second?
Absolutely. And Ian has helpfully popped in the chat, humans know the difference between good and evil ever since that tree incident, which is a very good point. Now, Jeremy, we've got a few questions now that have come in, some really fantastic questions.
Good.
So Joe has said Joe struggles with people's attitudes to artificial intelligence. I've heard them discussing homework that's due, classifying it into either AI or I need to do that. And she says, I find it devalues the tasks I seem to spend more time setting than the pupils do completing. And I suppose that might be true, say, if it's a research task, or even some kind of, I don't know, you know, some explanatory paragraphs. Any ideas how to approach this to people? Should I just accept and embrace it? Does anyone else relate to this? Should homework as we know it be changed? I think there'll be lots of people here who can resonate with that, Joe. And I know obviously, Jeremy, you're not a teacher.
Yeah.
But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I often am accused of being very negative about AI, notwithstanding having spent most of my life as a techie in that area. And I am working on ways of trying to help people see how we can use it for good. But just to explore that a little bit, I think we need to think along the lines of how does this amplify what I can do, but actually doesn't take away or sideline aspects of my creativity? How does it augment something that I'm doing? And of course, it's always a little bit of a gray area. Take the calculator. I understand that mental arithmetic is kind of back on the table again, because people using calculators, smartphones or whatever to do even complex calculations, you lose a sense of what is going on, what math is about even. So, you know, does that mean we throw out calculators? No, we don't, but we need to have a sense of where to use them sensibly, and maybe to only begin to use some of the technology when you've grasped some of the fundamentals. So where might we use AI? Well, I think if we could use it as one or two tools that enable you to do a search for articles or for information that actually reference the real articles, as opposed to ChatGPT that just tells you what the answer is. I've been using a tool called Leo almost every day. Most of the time it's pretty rubbish, but what it does do is to reference the actual sources that the information came from. And I think what there, again, we need to teach ourselves as well, certainly children and students, is how to evaluate, how to do that sort of research, not just to take what comes back from a machine as the gospel truth, as it were. You know, well, that's the answer, and rush on, tick, I've finished my homework. But how do you know that this is the right answer? Well, okay, where's the source? Is it a reliable source? How do you find out whether it's a reliable source? Now, you know, we should be doing that. Those of us who are older kind of got used to doing that, and we can adapt the tools to make it maybe a little bit faster than going down to the library and knowing what sources online we can trust. But if you haven't got that background and just go straight into using the tools or ChatGPT to tell you what the answer to a question is, then something very, very fundamental gets lost. So I think it's looking at ways that it can amplify and augment, but not replace. And in education, I think you guys know probably far better than I do that the child development from primary right the way through it's a sensitive, it's a critical thing, you know, and there's certain things that need to happen in a child's experience for them to grow and develop. So if you just put technology in the way too soon, I think that we're depriving our children of what we ought to be offering them.
Absolutely, and we could also go off on a tangent there about smartphones, and that I think that's probably a topic for another event like this. But absolutely, I think that's really worth considering.
I don't know whether that's helped the questioner, but
no, I think so. I think the other thing I would say is that I have heard colleagues say things like they will give a number of sources, even paper sources, that children then have to read and then synthesize the information that they have in front of them. There's a couple of questions that are kind of on the same kind of theme. So Elaine and Jenny have both referred to budget cuts, reductions, reduction of numbers of classroom assistants, and shortage of specialist teachers in some subjects. Having access to IA can help to mitigate some of these problems. Perhaps it shouldn't be that way, but it can be used like that. Sitting students in front of a screen isn't always ideal, but it can allow more expert or individualized input than a cover teacher. And Elaine also mentioned that it can help with differentiating, so creating different, levels of difficulty or different kind of skill set tasks that feed into different kind of skills, young people with additional needs. So I think there are many teachers who kind of perhaps see this as a necessary evil and are seeing that there's a very pragmatic argument to be made. Yeah, I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts on that, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think the problem with this technology, and it's not just in education, I come across it in the medical sector and social services, all sorts of sectors, and that is there are choices that policymakers can make. And unfortunately, the choices that we're making is that we prefer tech to people. It's exactly the same in policing. There's a huge, protest and discussion about the use of AI in policing, and actually the data isn't there to support the evidence that this actually improves policing. In fact, the opposite might be argued. But the problem is that if the policymakers think that a piece of technology that they can buy, perhaps relatively cheaply, will replace a teaching assistant, then that's the direction that they will go. And I think the teaching profession has to push back. It's a difficult process, but there has to be a pushback that actually raises the question, what do we actually want to do in education? Do we want to just push people out the door, ticking boxes that they have acquired certain amount of knowledge, or do we want people to have understood how to acquire knowledge, how to process knowledge, how to deal with it, how to be creative, how to be problem solvers? And I think all of those are things that you cannot really get from AI. And if we start using the technology too soon before in a child or a student's education, they actually haven't got the ability to even look at what is in front of them on the screen and judge, actually, is this correct? And this is one of the big problems, just doing a bit of research on educational tools, that ChatGPT is probably the last thing that you should rely on, because it does produce errors. There are some education tools, one of the ones that I put up on the screen actually, where they're putting a huge amount of effort into taking in the States different curricula and state requirements, which are different between states, in order to create proper guardrails to ensure that the resources that are output, if you like, in terms of lesson plans and the actual details are correct. And I think there's the assumption now that amongst a lot of people who are very, very naive about this stuff, is that, oh, it's wonderful, it's as clever as we are. It isn't. It's dumb, it's stupid, it's statistics. And we're being incredibly naive if we believe that the output of these things is reliable and factual and not biased in some way.
I think that's a very interesting point. And you also wonder, with the kind of the collection of information that ChatGPT kind of surveys and synthesizes, you do wonder how much of that has a particular ideological slant, and then what gets imbibed into teaching, perhaps without teachers even noticing.
I mean, a key thing here is that again, there's some technical papers coming out about this, but just imagine now you're using this in education. It's being used in all sorts of places. People are writing blogs. Even pastors are repurposing their sermons, heaven forbid, to put on blogs. All of this is now populating the internet with AI generated very flat text, which is going back into the training of AI systems. And there is some, again, technical papers that I've been reading, some evidence that this is actually flattening, dumbing down language. When you regard creativity as something about the expression of what it means to be human, whether it's doing a painting or writing something or making something, there's something much more going on there than just replicating, which is all AI does. It replicates statistically based on what it's been trained on. And there's a lady professor up in Edinburgh has written a book recently called AI Mirrors. And she sees this as basically that the mirror that we're looking at is the past history, and it cannot tell us anything about the future because it's just historic data that has been trained. So from an educational point of view, the more we engage with these tools, the more the flatter the output will be, and we're dumbing down the creative process and our ability to be creative, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I think that, that's something really helpful that I'd not really considered, but I can really see how that would come to the fore, how kind of the regeneration of regenerated information actually just creates a rather grey, kind of bland series of information. Now, we've got about 5 minutes left, and there are a few more questions.
Sure. All right.
Phil is asking, how do we safeguard young people who use AI? I mean, that's quite a broad question. We might be able to kind of use that in the answer to another question. Alistair has asked, if part of education is to prepare our pupils for the world of work, how do we see this changing so we can use education to prepare in the widest sense? So I suppose, I don't know, perhaps how can we safeguard but also pragmatically use education to prepare for what is inevitably going to be part of most young people's futures?
I think we definitely have to educate children and students, depending on the age, about technology. Clearly, they need to know what AI is. But I think that one of the ways to do that is, as I've been saying, is to be creative about trying to help children understand what it means to be a human being, and alongside that, what this thing called artificial intelligence really is. Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of naivety about it, and probably teaching materials that you might come across that may not really reflect the reality. But putting that to one side, the ideal is if we can help them to see that what they're engaging with is actually very limited, albeit it looks quite clever. But you could use it in certain ways that don't damage what it means to be human. They actually help us and assist us. So it's about what will lead to human flourishing. And I think that will better equip them too for the place of work to themselves decide whether they want to engage with Copilot. I mean, I came across a study the other day that was saying that people actually using Microsoft's Copilot were finding it was more stressful and generating more work. Really, I can't go into the details, but it's just assumed this stuff is brilliant. It's going to replace people. It's going to enable us to be an awful lot more productive. In the coding area, I've seen technical reports showing that coding quality has actually gone down, not up, and that productivity is not as high as one might expect it to be. Very interesting quote here. Again, I think it should come into how we prepare children. Is my son's company, which is a digital agency, their chief designer was telling me when I was interacting with him about coding. He said, because our coders are really expert in their skill and their craft, as he called it, they can quickly spot bad code that is generated by Copilot. He said, but I wouldn't let a junior use it. they need to learn their craft.
Yeah.
This is a Christian speaking about this, and I think that's the sort of thing that we could help children and students, is to develop your craft, then look at whether these tools can actually be used to assist without actually sidelining your skills, if you like. Ending up with you de-skilled. So I guess that's sort of a little bit of an answer to how we safeguard children. I think it's about educating them. I think there's some tools, unfortunately, that they will get access to on smartphones, and that's a whole new story. I think there's a lot of horrible stuff going on now with way AI can be used to generate fake images and videos and audio as well. Children will get sucked into that. So it'll be social media on steroids, I'm afraid, in terms of the problems that we're piling up for ourselves.
I like Dan has just said he loves the idea of developing a craft in relation to using AI, like a master apprentice relationship. I'm just going to go, I think this will be the last question now, and Alex has asked if he can ask the question. So Alex, if you want to unmute yourself, and we have about 5 minutes,
okay,
and then I'll need to draw this to an end.
Okay, can you hear me? Because I've got earpods in, and I don't know if my
I can hear you fine.
Okay. And I wanted to ask a question because I hope it will be clear. But firstly, thank you very much. It's fascinating, particularly the stuff about the environmental impact and the dumbing down of language were ideas I hadn't considered at all. And I'm just thinking about my experience with AI, and I have experienced using it to create a text, and then because I have a craft, being able to discern whether it's a useful text or not. And that kind of leads me to the question of, another experience I've had with AI is that it's often better at answering questions, especially when I'm seeking advice about, for example, brand logoing and finding colors which match and things, not personal advice. I don't go to it for counseling. But what I've noticed is that I've been surprised how well listened I've felt to compared to when I ask humans questions, who often don't respond to the actual question. So with both those things in mind, it seems to me that AI, one of the positives could be that it's going to, and because of the availability of knowledge, it's going to push us, or it could push us towards a more skills-based curriculum. Certainly what you've been describing in terms of the importance of creativity, what it is to be a human, the ability for programmers to be able to discern whether it's a good program or not. This is more of a skills-based focus. And I think that, in my opinion, is that a heavier focus on skills than knowledge would be beneficial for education. My question is, do you think that, and it's, I suppose, an opinion, do you think it is likely that AI will encourage us to move more towards skills than knowledge-based content? And what do we need to do if we want to encourage, because of the tendency towards tech over humans, maybe it won't go that way. Maybe it will just get kind of more and more robotic. And so what would the process look like of using AI as this is not what we want, to move more towards I don't know if that question makes sense.
Yeah, it's quite a big question. I think first comment I want to make is that I don't think it's a good idea to move in the direction of engaging with AI because there's less friction, because it's politer, or it's nicer to us. One of the problems with that is that human relationships aren't simple, they're messy. That's part of what it means to be human, created in God's image, and part of the consequence of the fall, that human relationships are messy. And there's certainly evidence of people who are discarding human relationships, romantic relationships. I mean, not huge numbers of people, but it is becoming more prevalent, for AI relationships. Why? Because they can set them up to be the persona that they want them to be. And there is a school of what's called humans-centric AI that actually is saying we should not develop artifacts that have personalities, and actually the term I should never be used in an output. It should always be a sort of mechanical task generation, rather than engaging with somebody as if it were human. And I think that's dehumanizing us, and it's a big topic which I can't fully develop this evening. So I don't think that's a particularly good direction to go down. And I think also it's dangerous to go fully down the idea of we just become knowledge workers. Life is much more about more than gaining of knowledge. The creativity happens, on top of knowledge. So yes, you need information, you need knowledge, but part of being a human and being creative and made in God's image is being able to process that. And the one thing you see that artificial intelligence cannot do and does not do is encode embodied experience, if you like, lived experience. How we learn as humans is through lived experience, and that's part of what you guys are doing in teaching and in front of students. So I think that to put a computer in the place of a human doing that is very dangerous for humanity, in the sense of just diminishing what it means to be a human being. And it isn't all about convenience and productivity. I think from a Christian perspective, life is so much more than that. But unfortunately, our paymasters think productivity is what rules the world. And in the northern sphere, I guess it probably does. But as Christians, we have to be people with a different narrative, with a different story to tell, a better story, to coin the phrase from Glyn Harrison's book, I think it is. Yeah, we have a better story. I'm sorry, that's probably not really terribly adequately answered your question, because it's quite a big one.
Jeremy, I just think sorry, Alex.
I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you, really. I agree with what you're saying. I guess I'm curious to know, to what extent do you think we will go back towards the more human, creative, skills-based, like important stuff? Do you think that is more likely to happen, or is it, given the tendency towards the easy, it might not?
I think there could be a backlash. I think the way these bubbles sometimes end up bursting is a human backlash. I mean, there's some evidence already of not a full-blown AI winter, but I think this tech has not met expectations in some business quarters. There's still quite a lot of caution about using it for some of the reasons that I've already mentioned, and I think there is some pushback in the education sector, from what I can read and hear. And unfortunately, there are those who are really keen and those who see the dangers that we've talked about this evening. And I think that, unfortunately, I sometimes feel like a prophet of doom, because you can see how things might go. And as with social media and the smartphone, you can see where all this is going. And now we're looking back a couple of decades, and we're seeing the damage that we've done. And my view was that if we had privatized data 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we wouldn't be in the state that we're in now. So sometimes it takes a while before society catches up, and then there's a backlash, and people either stop using it, or regulators start to see that there's so much damage being done by bad actors that something has to be done. So I think as Christians, we need to major on the aspects of what it means to be human, the creativity, the authentic relationships, the moral agency that only humans can have.
Thank you, Jeremy. Honestly, I feel like I wish we could go on for longer, but I think we're going to have to draw this to an end now. But Jeremy, at some point, we would love to invite you back to carry on this, and perhaps have a bit more of a deep dive into some of these issues, because they are fascinating. And
very happy to do that. Yes.
Just very quickly, do Joe, do we have any links that we can just pop in the chat? Just so, because Jeremy has written a book, can you remind us please of the title?
Yes, Masters or Slaves. There's also my website, jeremypeckham.com,
Yeah.
where you can find the reference to the book. And then mastersorslaves.com is an online it's a study course with a video introduction for about 10 modules that you can do in small groups, home groups, or individual study, and it's based on the book.
Excellent. Well, that's fabulous. And I think Joe's just about to pop it into the chat. We are really, really thankful. And Joe said she's going to send the links as an email. And we'll also, I think, send the links to your website, where you can buy the book. And we'll also send the recording as well. Jeremy, can I just thank you so much on behalf of ACT? This is a fascinating topic. We're going to look forward to going deeper into it at some point. But yeah, just thank you and bless you so much for all your work in this area.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And guys, please do take a look at our website if you have not already, and do consider becoming a member of the Association of Christian Teachers. We are here to support, encourage, equip, and influence on behalf of Christian teachers in the UK for the glory of God, and for mutual encouragement, to encourage you to be salt and light in our schools. So please do take a look at our website, join if you haven't done so already. Great to have you with us. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.